this was a different kind of project, and I'm wondering what was the toughest part about preparing the Lost album for release.
Wow. I don't know. It wasn't that tough. uh, it just seemed like a thing. Well, as it happens with a lot of different things and projects, life gets in the way. So we were hoping to get it out a year or two ago. And I guess COVID, even though it didn't entail going out of doors to put it together, it just kind of made everything a bit lopsided for us. So, but anyway, we had the tapes. I had a lot of photos from that era, so I poured through the archives and put it together. It was just sorry, it wasn't hard.
Okay, no, that's good.
Yeah.
But and then
what? I will interject this though.
Okay.
I mean, listening to it, of course, you're hearing Pat DiNizio singing lead on everything, and it's, that's always gets to you a bit,
Yeah.
since we lost him. Almost, it's almost 5 years that we lost Pat, if you can believe that.
Yeah.
In December, it'll be 5 years ago. That was probably the hardest part, just remembering the camaraderie and the hard work we put into it, and just thinking, well, Pat's not here anymore, but the songs and his voice live on.
Yeah, and actually, coincidentally, because I do content and social media for different bands, and at the time, I was working with Kurt Newman and the Bodines, and Pat's passing really, hit him hard, and he had a lot of fond memories of being on the road with you guys, and just had nothing but good things to say about touring with all of you.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, Sammy was always, I remember on our first tour in 1986, our first stop in Milwaukee, Sammy met us at our hotel and just before soundcheck showed us around town and welcomed us with open arms. And he was a great ambassador for Milwaukee, But yeah, good memories of those guys too, for sure.
Yeah. Well, how did you approach, the idea of, well, we can always overdub. Pat obviously cannot overdub. How much can we do, and what is fair to do in terms of all of that?
With regards to this record?
Yeah, sorry, with regards to the Lost album.
We didn't do any overdubbing. This
really?
was all
Okay.
finished. Yeah, this was finished in 1993. So we were just sitting on the tapes all this time. Matter of fact, we have a lot of archival things that will finally be seeing the light of day in the coming year or two. We have plans for a lot of releases from the vaults.
Okay. No, I mean, that's fascinating, because the most people would take the opportunity and go, all right, I can't resist tweaking this, tweaking that, or thinking, all right, it's been so many years, I would probably play this part differently.
Yeah.
Did you guys just naturally have that restraint, or did you just go into it and say, you know what, to be fair, let's not touch a thing. Let's make it as a pristine an artifact as possible?
I think the latter. I think we felt that we did spend a lot of time recording back then, and we got it to a point that we were happy with in the day. And I got to say, as much as I enjoy all the Beatles remixes and all the things that have come out, archival box sets that have come out in recent years, as a fan, I love hearing it. But I never, ever think it's much of an improvement on the original, I guess what you're asking is a little different, because we didn't remix, but we also didn't do any overdubs or tweaks, as you were saying. So yeah, I think we just saw it as a document of what we were doing at that point in time. And I think it actually does stand up pretty well without any other additional tweaking. But there's another reason we didn't do any overdubs or remixes or anything. The master tapes were lost. The multi-tracks, rather, were lost.
Oh, okay.
Couple of
Well,
years,
that will affect it.
yeah,
Yeah.
couple of years ago, we had them at a storage facility, a real good for storage facility in Brooklyn. They took up 2 city blocks. They stored all kinds of not tapes, not only tapes, but a lot of documents for businesses, and just all kinds of things. Well, so happens there was a big fire there, and it's nothing to do with the Universal fire. But matter of fact, we were driving home from a gig in, I think, Annapolis or somewhere in Virginia on one Sunday, and we had to go. We were playing BB King in Manhattan that night, and as we're driving on the turnpike, we noticed all this smoke coming out of Brooklyn. So, wow, look at that, big fire there. Turned out to be this fire. So we lost a bunch of stuff. Even though it was mostly multi-tracks, happily we have safeties of everything. And the funny thing is, about a month before that fire, I hadn't been there in years, but I actually went there to retrieve one tape that we were going to be working with. So I was happy to get my mitts on that. But it's just funny how you put your stuff in these facilities. And of course, the Universal fire a couple of years ago was such a huge loss. But you think, okay, well, stuff is safe and secure, but it's not nice to fool with Mother Nature.
No, life happens, as you said. Now, what about the possibility of mixing some of these songs into your live set as you tour with either Robin or Marshall?
Yeah, we're talking about it, and I think for sure we're going to do that. There's one song in particular that we're singling out called "Out of This World," and we've already talked about performing that one. And there's a few others I think we'll probably delve into as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One song that really caught my attention was I think it's track 2, "Dear Abby," and I'm wondering about that because you really practiced restraint on that one, and it's just you. It sounds like a tambourine. And I'm curious what made you decide, all right, I'm not going to go with the full kit on this one.
I actually don't honestly remember. I know we tried a lot of songs in different ways, and ended up trying different arrangements and grooves and things. They're in the vault too, different takes of these songs. But with that one, I honestly don't remember. I wish I could tell you. I think it might have been just a time restraint thing or a budgetary thing where we said, all right, we got to finish this. And I kind of like the way it stands, though.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm always curious when someone voluntarily kind of steps back, with that. Number one, it shows, a certain amount of humility, and it's usually people that, again, play for the song and don't play to show off necessarily. And so it's always fascinating to me when they go, you know what, less of me in this is better.
Well, you're right. I think it might have taken us a while to learn that mentality and embrace it. It comes with age, right? But I think around the time we started making records, we learned, oh yeah, all our favorite records, there's just not a ton of fills, and there's not a ton of noise on them in terms of frivolity anyway. Yeah, why don't we play off of each other? I think you really hear that on the Lost album, where we're in the studio together and we're feeding off each other. And Mike has some really incredible bass lines. I was listening to it earlier today, actually, and just marveling at what he brought to it. And we were kind of focusing on the grooves and presenting, as you said, playing for the song. That's really what makes for the best music.
Yeah.
And once in a while, you'll hit on a tune where, oh, well, I can go nuts on this one. There's room for it, or somehow that attitude supports the gist of the tune or the lyrics, but playing for the song is it's the best approach a musician could take, really, because ultimately that's what it's all about. And you're supporting your fellow musicians and the lead vocalist. Ultimately, you're
Yeah.
there to as a drummer, I'm there to provide a framework uh, for all those things. For Mike to do his thing on the bass, and Pat was playing rhythm, so he's kind of locked in with what I'm doing, and then Jimmy had space to do whatever he needed when he could. And not to say that I didn't like to get in a cool little drum fill here and there. And I always
Yeah.
strive to do something that was not technically proficient, but I like to say something when I do a fill and
Hmm.
have it be cool. Some of
Yeah.
the drummers that I admired growing up, Hal Blaine, Ringo, and there were some New York session players that don't get spoken about too much. There was Gary Chester, who played on tons and tons of hit records in the 60s and 50s, and Buddy Saltzman. And I think about Buddy Saltzman a lot because whenever I'm asked, oh, what made you start playing drums? I think of the early 60s and listening to the Four Seasons records. And he was the primary drummer on those sessions. And some of the fills he did and the approach he took was unorthodox. And he would just come up with these little ideas that made you turn your head and say, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And they become little hooks in the song, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Even on a non-melodic instrument like the drums, those little twists and turns really make you want to come back. Like, there's so many examples. One that comes to mind is the song Ronnie by the Four Seasons, and on the outro he does these fills that sound like he's hitting a punching bag.
Yeah.
And I actually became friends with Buddy, and I interviewed him, and I said, Buddy, what made you play like that? And he said, well, I think it was madness. He said, being a studio musician in the 60s in New York City was maddening. He said you would take a taxi to a session, they drive off with your trap case, or you work with producers and saying, I need something different today. You got to, just, I don't want what you did the other time. Give me. So he just felt like there was so many demands put on him and circumstances that made him, as he told me, it was either do that or break a bunch of dishes.
Right.
So anyway, it's a long-winded answer, but I always took inspiration from drummers that, not necessarily from soloing, but just different approaches to fills and the way they played the song. And the Hal Blaine, like I said, was another great example. His playing was superlative. It just he grooved like crazy, he swung like mad, and he just came up with these ideas during the breaks. That's what I want to do. And I never strove to be the best drummer. I just strove to be the coolest drummer. And Ringo too. I mean, some people I think misunderstand him. The thing about Ringo, they say, oh, he wasn't technically proficient, but he was. There's still some things Ringo did that I can't do. Certain fills, like coming out of the bridge on "Tell Me Why," and some of the fills he did on "I Want to Hold Your Hand," they're really kind of tough to do. But I think I learned to swing from listening to Ringo.
Yeah, no, I mean, every professional drummer I've talked to loves Ringo and will defend him to the death. And, it's, as Todd Zuckerman of Styx said, he's like, let me see you come up with perfect parts for all of those songs,
Right.
and it just fit. But and the Hal Blaine thing is interesting. I guess that what I would say that I hear similarly there is, and it's evident on this Lost album, is, I would say you were like the king of punctuation when it comes to drumming, in that it's these usually a crash, but not always, but it's, timed in with either a specific vocal part or a specific guitar riff. And again, it's not drawing attention to the drums, but it's more, all right, let's kind of give a boost to this particular instrument or this particular vocal part, and give it an extra crescendo or, a push. And I guess I'd say, to me, that's where I could hear similarities between you and Hal Blaine as far as that goes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's an interesting observation. He was a master at that, you know. I mean, when you're going back to what we were saying before, when you're a musician in a band and you're playing for the song and playing for your fellow musicians and for the lead singer, punctuation is always a cool thing. It's like you're having a dialogue, really, musically. You know, even though the vocalist is singing the lyrics, you're still involved in that storytelling. And yeah, sometimes you need a comma, sometimes you need an exclamation point, and or dot dot dot.
Yeah.
Pause.
Right. Although what's interesting though is because, you know, the whole legend of the Smithereens is involves the Who, and you seeing pictures of the Who
Right.
on
Jimmy's loose
Jimmy's
leaf.
Jimmy's loose leaf.
Day one of freshman year, I might add.
Yeah.
That was the first day of high school. Yeah.
But yet I would say your style is very much not of a Keith Moon variety, you know, and not to take anything away from Keith Moon. He influenced so many drummers and did so much stuff, but he's one I would call kind of a busier guy for the most part too. It all worked for the Who's music, but it was a different kind of feel. And so it's interesting that, you know, he can be obviously an influence on you, and yet you don't sound like him.
But again, he was a big influence, and I still listen to him a lot and try and figure out what he was doing, because he really created his own language, I think, you know. Even watching footage of him sometimes, I'm trying to decipher how he's actually coming up with what I'm hearing. It's some kind of alchemy.
Yeah.
But I do play a lot like Keith on certain songs, especially in our live show. I still hold his playing very dear to my heart. And but it's not that evident on the Lost album or on many of our studio albums, but live, because Jimmy and I learned to play together in his garage in Carteret, New Jersey. We started in the early 70s, and we were playing whatever we could learn from Tommy. And I still have some tapes from back then, and you could hear we're not as restrained, but we are as we became, but we were getting it together pretty good, you know. So
well, that's a hell of a steep learning curve to start on, you know.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
But when you're that young, you spend so much time listening to the records and learning and recreating it. So, you know, it becomes part of your DNA. I'm not saying we nailed it every time, but we did pretty good. And we certainly had the spirit more than anything.
Yeah.
What they were doing still is a big ingredient in our hearts and souls, you know, and in our music. And I'll add something to the Keith Moon thing. You probably know this, but Keith was a huge Hal Blaine fan. And he really, the germ, I think, of Keith's approach and attitude was from listening to all those big fills that Hal did on the Ronettes records, you know, and a lot of, he was a big Beach Boys fan. He was actually a bigger Jan and Dean fan. Keith was. He loved what Hal and Earl Palmer brought to those records, because both Hal and Earl played next to each other in the studio on the Jan and Dean records.
Oh, okay. Which
made for a real big soulful groove. But anyway, I was friends with Hal, and I interviewed him a few times, one time for Modern Drummer. And I asked him, I said, because the article, it was the 50th anniversary of, this goes back several years, but it was the 50th anniversary, of 1967. So Modern Drummer was doing a 1967 centric issue. So I asked Hal, thinking, what did you think about some of the up and coming drummers during that time? Like, what did you think of Ginger Baker? And what did you think of Keith Moon? He said, I love Keith Moon. And he said, Hal was the house drummer at Monterey Pop at the festival. I think
Okay.
he played with Simon and Garfunkel, Johnny Rivers, maybe Laura Nyro, and a few others. So he was there for the whole thing, and that was the first time he saw the Who and met Keith, and he said, "I just love the drama he brought to the music, and I'm sure he picked up on his influence on Keith." And I think Hal also dug Keith Moon because Keith was very vocal in his praise for Hal as well. But
That helps.
yeah,
Yeah. But and then you mentioned the whole idea of DNA, and one thing, because I was going back over looking at videos of you guys performing, both back in the 80s and 90s, and then more recently. One thing that's been consistent, which is kind of fascinating, is when you play, you have such a calm demeanor, that your face and everything, and yet your sound is so fierce, and it's this wonderful contradiction. And I'm wondering, is this, and maybe I'm like overthinking this, I do that with lots of things, but is this kind of this inner struggle you have, or are these two sides of your persona that both get along quite fine?
I think I just get into my zone, and I have to relax, and that's probably what's coming off of my countenance when I'm playing. I don't know, maybe there is something deeper to it. I really don't know. I really have fun playing, I think that's a very important thing, especially for young musicians to keep in mind. It's very important to learn your craft, but as you grow with what you're doing with performing and recording and your musical career, have fun, man. That's what it's all about. You're lucky to be expressing yourself with your instrument. Hopefully you've found some bandmates that you can really mesh with. I think that's one of the paramount things. And that's one of the biggest secrets to the Smithereens longevity. Jimmy and I knew Mike even longer. Mike Mazaris, our bass player. I went to grammar school with Mike.
Oh.
And Jimmy, although he lived in the same town, Carteret, he lived on the other side of the school zone. So he went to a different grammar school, but he and Mike went to the same church. So he knew Mike too, although I didn't meet Jimmy till high school. So we grew up together. And our musical sensibilities are really in line, as they were with Pat too. I mean, the three of us, before we met Pat, we were scuffling for a while and trying to get the band going. And we were getting it together real well, but we needed that fourth member. So when we met Pat, it really exploded. But we liked each other. We were like brothers, and we liked being with each other, and we liked playing with each other. We traveled together. We lived together. I think the best bands, you don't have to be in love with each other, but there's got to be some kind of some bond that keeps it. It is better, of course, when you do get along.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess there's plenty of examples of bands that were the members who were at odds with each other that created a certain kind of combustion.
Well, the best example, of course, being the Who. They took that anger at each other and put it into their music. But
I guess Oasis too, right? Famously.
Yes. Pretty much if you go through rock and roll and you're brothers, you're doomed. Then the Kinks, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But anyway, my point being that for the younger listeners, it's important to really try and find people that you're going to want to spend time with, and whose musical sensibilities are in line with yours. I think that's an important thing. And we were very fortunate to have that, and still to this day.
Yeah, and along those lines, because I was going through some of your past interviews and stuff, and at one point you said, in terms of, when you were a threesome and then you finally met Pat, you said you were trying to find a lead singer that was sympathetic to our sensibilities and our tastes, which goes along with what you're saying, but I've never heard anyone put it in terms of who was sympathetic to our I mean, because it almost, there's almost like that, like someone who takes pity on us, almost, and I don't
Maybe
think
that was
that's
the
what,
wrong. Maybe that was the wrong choice of words. I
right.
thought it. I thought it to mean that. Yeah, maybe sympathize is wrong, but I thought it meant that he was in line. That
Hmm.
he dug what we were doing. We dug what he was doing.
Yeah.
I better look that up before I use it again. That word. I got my dictionary right here. Actually, I always keep it next to me.
I mean, I understand, I think, what you were saying, and it goes along with what you were just talking about of, finding someone you can genuinely mesh with.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then it's also interesting, the whole, it's rare to find a musician that actually talks about the need for that mentality of fun. The years and years ago, I interviewed the drummer Steve Ferroni,
Mhm.
and he's the only other guy I think I've interviewed or one of the few guys I've interviewed who had that same perspective, because
Ah,
he said, I always try to remember, he said, I don't work for a living, I play.
yeah.
He said, I really focus on the fact that I play music, I play,
Right.
and I don't know what's always been your key for keeping that, because Lord knows the music industry is brutal and it's a rough road, and when you're starting out and living out of a van and that kind of thing, how does one, what's your advice for musicians to be able to keep that sense of play?
Hmm. I guess speaking from my own experience, when I was growing up, and I was crazy for records and the radio, crazy for it, and spent all my waking hours reading up on it and listening and learning to play. And I just always thought, what could be more fun than that? To imbibe music and be creative, and what could not be fun about that? So just from my experiences, the non-fun stuff is the travel and the canceled flights, and you know um, just the drudgery that goes with that. But actually playing and creating, and how can you maintain that? Well, I think it's important to stay in touch with your initial inspirations, the inspiration you had when you first started to play or first started to be interested in music. I mean, for anybody to pick up drumsticks or pick up a guitar or a trombone, whatever it might be, and dedicate themselves to learning it, you're not going to stay with it unless you got a parent or a teacher that's, hitting you with a stick to keep at it. I think the best expressive musicians that have come a long way, they stuck with it from their young age till later in their career, because it's fun. And remember that spark that you had when you were first listening to music. I mean, that's never ever left me, ever. I don't see how it can or should. I'm still very much in touch with the sensations I got from listening to the Orlons when "Don't Hang Up" came out, or "Walk Like a Man" by the Four Seasons, or "I Get Around" by the Beach Boys. I mean, those records just sent me into orbit when I heard them,
Hmm.
and I still feel that way when I listen to them. So I guess I'm just saying that it's got to be fun when you started. So stay in touch with those impulses, just be it from, it could be from actually learning new things on your instrument too. You say, well, there's always a different way to approach your music. You could, I'll just try a different fill, or I'll try a different intro, or I'll just do things that I haven't tried before. That will keep it fresh and fun for you too.
Hmm.
Or come up with a whole different kind of songwriting approach. God, there's just infinite ways to keep it fun and interesting, I think.
Yeah. Now the question is, do you still have those kind of feelings when you come across new songs, maybe not
Yeah.
necessarily brand new, just
Oh,
recorded,
yeah.
but new to you?
Absolutely. You know a group called the Besnard Lakes?
Oh,
I heard a track by them yesterday on WFMU, and I mean, there's certain shows I listen to, radio shows. There's a radio station called WFMU. You might be aware of it.
right.
I actually have a weekly streaming show on that station. But there's certain shows that I listen to, and I always have either my phone or my pencil and paper ready to write down the titles and the artist. There's a group called Best Coast, and there's a couple tracks by them that just get to me. A few numbers by the Bird and the Bee. A group from New Jersey called the Ribeye Brothers, the Sadies from Canada.
Yeah.
There's tons and tons of new stuff that I dig. And yes, the answer is yes, I still do get very excited about new music when it speaks to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I can go on and on. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. And then, because I did read about, your pull toward being a DJ, although being a musician was first off, although, because I did my time in radio back in California, and, most of us were people who wish we could have been musicians, but really had no talent in that area, but just still had that absolute love of it all. And it's great that you've found a Freeform home for doing that, because I was ruined from day one, if only because I interned for, do you remember a guy named Jim Ladd?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We've done interviews with Jim, sure.
Oh, okay.
We went up to his house one time, as a matter of fact.
Oh,
he had
okay.
a monkey. He had a pet monkey.
Yes, that was when he had that little funicular that you had to ride up to the house from where you parked down below. Yeah. Right. He's not in that anymore, but yeah, that was
that was interesting.
Yes, definitely. Not the best house when that earthquake hit, but still, it was fun. But yeah, no, and he was the last guy. Gosh, it didn't seem like the nation who was allowed to pick his own songs and stuff, and so. It was great. I was in college at the time, and you see that taste of what radio once was or could be. And then, it kind of just gets, it gets crushed. And as a result, there's all this stuff out there that's, I don't know, it had so much potential, but then just disappeared,
Yeah. Well, yeah. Of course, we grew up with AM radio, Top 40, which was a different animal, but it was still great breeding ground for us.
Yeah.
Because the music was so wonderful. Then in the 70s, late 60s, I started listening to FM radio, and there was plenty of freeform programming going around in the New York area. So that's what I actually wanted to do that. I actually did go to college majoring in communication, and worked at Seton Hall, worked at the college radio station there in the 70s. And I was really determined that I was going to go into broadcasting. But as you said, things did change, and it was right around that time. I was just thinking, well, being a freeform DJ is the greatest thing. But then it started to get commercialized and corporate, and I said, it's not what I want to do. I can see where this is going. So Jimmy and I were playing with Mike already, and had my own t-shirt business. And I said, after one semester, you know what? I'm gonna try something different. So, but I always had the bug. I still wanted to be a DJ. So when I actually became a staff, wow, holy crap, that was 1996 when I started doing fill-ins on WFMU. That's a long time. Yeah, wow. So I did get to fulfill my dream in that regard.
Yeah.
So I get to do both, which is not too bad.
Yeah. And then, the one thing I read is, going through past interviews, was Pat had said that the longtime credo of the band is never give up. And I'm wondering, is the release of the Lost album part of that? And then B, how did you stick to that credo during the pandemic when suddenly, you couldn't go out and play, and it was a dark time for music.
Well, we figured that this is going to turn around at some point, and we'll go out and play as soon as it was possible, and we did. I guess it wasn't until 21, right, that things started to simmer down.
Yeah.
And we did. I know everybody was dormant for 2020. I know Jimmy was writing songs. I was writing songs. So that kept going. But and then I started doing Denny's Den, my show, in 2020. But then when 21 hit, we did a lot of gigs in 21, actually. So it wasn't that oppressive to us. We like everybody else, we weathered the storm, as it were, and went out when we could. Yeah, and we were actually quite busy in 21, looking back, and we're pretty busy this year. So you just roll with the punches.
Okay, so it doesn't.
What do you hear from? What about from other artists you've talked to? Is it pretty much the same answer, or?
I don't know. It varies. There's some that had a really positive spin, and they're like, all right, I'm going to try and make the most of this downtime. I've gotten to know a drummer named Michael McDermott, who's currently the drummer with Joan Jett. And he said, while there were so many things that are awful about it, he said, I tried to say, okay, this is my time to really just woodshed in my own studio and, take a huge advantage of this time. But then there were a lot of bands, especially nowadays, where live music is the only way you make any money. And, they went over a year without getting any kind of pay in any way.
Yeah, that was tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
But never give up.
Mm-hmm.
This is all we really know how to do. I say that with my tongue in my cheek a little bit. We all have different interests and things that we do.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this is what we want to do. So there's no reason. As long as, we say this in our show, and it sounds show busy and maybe cliche, but it's so true. We couldn't do this if our fans didn't want to come out and see us or buy our records. We have a very loyal and strong fan base that have been with us for decades. When we first hit the road on our first real tour in '86, we played a lot of colleges for a couple of years there. And they loved us. That generation, they were a few years younger than us, but they really dug the Smithereens. And they went off and had their lives, had their families, their careers, and now they're retired and they're empty nesters, and they're coming back to see us.
Mm-hmm.
And they're reliving their youth and their fond memories, and they're really still crazy about the band, maybe even more so. So what I'm saying is we have a very solid fan base and audience, and they, what's gratifying, and this goes back to what we were saying about having fun and enjoying playing together and being together. A lot of people say, and after our show, when we meet them, they just say that you guys just exude joy, and that really spills over to them, and hopefully gives them a pause, couple hours to forget their troubles. And well, I know that's what music does for me. It reinvigorates me sometimes.
Yeah.
It's the right sound and the right moment. It just, wow, it's a restart button sometimes. But it's true. And the other thing I say during our shows is that I say, the three of us grew up together. We would go to concerts together. We'd go see the Who, the Beach Boys, Kinks, and all these people, and we'd go shopping for records together. And back then, you couldn't just you know, click your phone and find a track. If you wanted
No.
some kind of import, you'd have to go to, you'd drive miles away or go into New York City and go to record stores that specialized in imports, or go to flea markets, garage sales.
Mm-hmm.
It was work, but it was fun, you know?
Yeah.
And then we'd, it occurred to me, oh yeah, Jimmy used to come over for the midnight movie when they would show A Hard Day's Night,
Mm-hmm.
or What's Up Tiger Lily, the Woody Allen film with the Love and Spoonful music in it, because you couldn't, it was not on demand. You actually had to, stay up late and watch these movies and get your reel-to-reel out and tape the audio from it before VCRs. So all of those experiences growing up together, going to school together, doing all those musical related things led to what we became. And as I say during our shows, it led to what you see here tonight. So I don't know. I guess I'm just circling back to the whole fun and passion aspect of it. But it's still there. You know what? It's really true. We still play like we're 14 years old,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully with a little more prowess, but we still really do. We really do. We play like we're teenagers. So one of the greatest compliments I ever got as a drummer, I don't know if you remember a record called Little Girl by Syndicate of Sound from 1966.
No.
Big hit record, the Chicago group. And if you heard it, you might recognize it. And it was before I came out, before I had a drum set. And there was a lot of cool drum fills on this record. So it was a big air drum record for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then flash forward to the year 2000, Jimmy and I played in a festival in New York City called Cave Stomp, where a promoter would bring back a lot of the garage bands that were still around that had hits in the 60s. We got to play with two members of the Bo Brummels, who had a big hit with Laugh, Laugh, and Just a Little. Big influence on the Smithereens. So that was very cool. But the Syndicate of Sound that had this record I'm talking about were also on the bill.
Mm.
And the original drummer, John Duckworth, was with them that night. And we chatted and became buddies. And he watched our show. And I'm already pushing 50 or into my 50. I don't remember at that time. And he watched the set as we backed up the guys from the Brummels. And he pulled me aside after we played. He says, I want to tell you something. I was watching you play from the wings. I could tell you're a talented drummer, but man, you played like you were 17. And I tell you, that's the best compliment I ever got. So I just think you have to play with the passion that you had when you were a kid.
Yeah.
I think it's real important. With anything in life, not just music. I think it's that childlike wonderment and that inspiration you took when you were a kid, and you're still soaking it all in. That feeling, it's important to me.